So, Will, I see you have written a book with an interesting title, How to Get to Heaven. Let's start off running, and let me ask you, how do you get to heaven?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do, Jay, is to consider what Jesus said about the topic. And we have two recorded cases where he was asked point blank the question by two different individuals, what must I do to inherit eternal life? In the first case, it was a rich young ruler, and Jesus had compassion on this guy. And he asked him a question back and said, well, you know the commandments. And the young man said, which ones? And Jesus said, well, do not kill, do not steal, honor your father and mother. He said, I've kept all these since I was a young man. What else is there? And Jesus looked at him with compassion, the story says, and said, well, one thing you lack. Sell all that you have, give to the poor, and come follow me. Well, that was a bit of a challenge, but this is the tendency that Jesus has, is to challenge us in many ways. And the subtitle of my book is How to Get to Heaven According to Teachings of Jesus. So I have to say at the outset that these aren't my ideas. I'm just trying to transfer my understanding of what Jesus said on these topics. So the first case, the rich young man went away sad because he had a lot of money, and Jesus concluded this little episode with the famous statement, it's easier for a rich man or for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. And now the question always is asked, well, is the only way to get into heaven to sell all that we have and give to the poor? I don't think so, but I think we have to be willing to put our priorities straight and consider spiritual values higher than material values. And this was the challenge he gave to this young man. Now the other instance was a lawyer who asked him the same question, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said, well, you're a lawyer, what does the law say? And he said, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and mind, love thy neighbor as thyself. And Jesus said, you're right, do this and you'll live. But then being a lawyer, he was looking for the fine print, and he asked the question, well, who is my neighbor? And then Jesus tells this wonderful story of the Good Samaritan, where the man coming down from Jericho was met by robbers. He was beaten up and left for dead. And three people came by, a Levite, who is a priest essentially, and he walked on the other side of the road so as not to tarnish himself with possibly dead person. And the other was a rabbi, and he apparently was too busy getting to service to do anything. But the third person, a Samaritan, who was considered sort of the underclass in that community, stopped and had compassion on the man, took him to an inn, left him there to be cared for, said he would take care of all the expenses when he came back. And so Jesus asked the lawyer, who was neighbor to this man? And the lawyer had to admit, well, I suppose the person who showed him compassion. And Jesus said, yes, go and do likewise. Now, the interesting common denominator in both those stories is the idea that Jesus didn't give him a theological test. He didn't say you had to believe in me, you had to join the synagogue or the church, or that you had to say the magic words to go to heaven. He challenged them with an ethical and a moral question. And my contention is that if we want to please God and establish a relationship with Him, we need to take seriously God's admonition to love our neighbor as ourselves. And in today's world, if we ask the same question, who's my neighbor, you would have to consider the fact that half the people on this planet are trying to subsist on less than $2 a day, and that 20,000 of them tragically die every day in the process. Now, if we can't see that and compassionately respond to that, how are we loving our neighbor in today's world? And so my book spends quite a bit of time discussing what we can do by various means, such as supporting the Millennium Development Goals, to do something tangible, to actually love our neighbor. And I think in that process, we'll be able to have bright prospects when we leave this life.